The next order of the day.
Government business. Order of the day number 1. Building units and group titles. Another legislation amendment bill. Resumption of second reading debate.
Thank you. Members, please leave the chamber quietly. I call the Attorney-General.
Speaker, in resuming debate on this bill, I want to again thank the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee for its consideration of the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. I also take the opportunity to thank the stakeholders that made submissions to assist the committee in its consideration of the bill, as well as stakeholders who participated in earlier consultation undertaken by government during development of the bill. I'm pleased to note that in its report about the bill, which was tabled on the 12th of August 2022, the committee recommended the bill be passed. I acknowledge the member for Noosa raised some issues in a statement of reservation included with the committee's report, and I will address those issues. But at the outset, I want to emphasise that the government appreciates the importance of Queensland's community titles sector. Community titles provide a wide range of housing and investment choices for an increasing number of Queenslanders. The government also recognises that body corporate issues can be complex and often attract a range of views and perspectives from stakeholders. The community titles sector needs to be supported by frameworks based on modern, fair and transparent standards of governance, as well as effective protections for owners. This is why the government is undertaking an extensive reform program for Queensland's community titles legislation. As promised, in the lead-up to the 2020 state election, the government has established a community titles legislation working group. The group is comprised of peak stakeholder representatives to provide advice to government about how best to address many issues and challenges facing unit owners and bodies corporate. I'm also pleased to note that as part of the budget, the government committed an additional $2.45 million over 3 years for the Office of the Commissioner for Body Corporate and Community Management, which will be used to support implementation of the reforms contained in the bill we are currently debating. Before I speak to the specific objectives of the bill amendments, I would like to briefly acknowledge the problems and issues being experienced by some of the people who will benefit from this bill, and again refer to the unit owners and residents at Coorong Cove Island Resort on South Stradbroke Island. Members may remember that I briefly mentioned some of the residents at Coorong Cove at the previous sitting, and I want to acknowledge a number of them who have been very active in lobbying for changes and have met with me about the challenges that they face. Beck Hasler, Shelley Stumbles, Daniel Purser, Michelle Kelly, Anthony Duncan, Andrea Gannon, Alan Cleveland, Claire Cleveland, Michelle Bowden, Dave Bowden, Gabrielle McCosker, Matthew O'Connor, Michael Rochelle, Karen Angel and many others, and I know some of them are here today again to see the debate for this bill. Coorong Cove is one of the developments regulated under the legislation that this bill will amend. As some members would be aware, unit owners at Coorong Cove have experienced significant problems in recent years, including disruptions to privately provided essential utility services, ongoing disputes and court actions, and allegations of large amounts of debt owing to and between bodies corporate at the development. Problems at Coorong Cove escalated recently to the extent that privately supplied water and electricity services to some residents were disconnected. I am deeply concerned for those residents affected by disconnections, particularly those who are elderly or who are vulnerable and have health problems. And I want to thank staff in my department and also Minister Enoch's department for reaching out to people affected with information about emergency assistance. I want to make it clear that the bill is not an intervention into specific issues and disputes at Coorong Cove, many of which are subject to judicial or quasi-judicial processes. Similarly, I want to make it clear that I have not intervened in or expressed a view on any of the legal issues at Coorong Cove. But this bill does aim to support unit owners and residents in relevant developments, including Coorong Cove, by fostering a better body corporate governance framework that provides more confidence in body corporate decision-making and more scope for unit owners to have a say in decisions that affect them. I know that many unit owners and residents at Coorong Cove are appreciative of the government's efforts to improve circumstances for developments like theirs, and they are eager to see the bill passed.
Order, members. Order. Visitors in the gallery, there will be no applause. I call the Attorney General.
As I outlined in my introductory speech, the main objective of the bill is to improve the operation of the Building Units and Group Titles Act 1980, which I will refer to as BUGTA, and the Mixed Use Development Act 1993, which I will refer to as the MUD Act. The clear focus of the bill is making body corporate governance arrangements under these two acts fairer and more transparent for unit owners. The bill also makes minor unrelated amendments to the Fair Trading Act 1989 to enable the Office of Fair Trading to issue infringement notices for breaches of consumer protection provisions of the Australian consumer law relating to gift cards. As members may recall, most community titles developments in Queensland operate under the Body Corporate and Community Management Act 1997, also known as the BCCM Act. However, prior to the commencement of the BCCM Act, several complex community titles style developments were established using a combination of specific planning legislation, such as the MUD Act and BUGTA. And those developments did not transition to the BCCM Act in 1997 and continue to operate under specialised planning laws, including BUGTA. The bill contains targeted reforms aimed at addressing the most pressing deficiencies in the MUD Act and BUGTA. In many instances, reforms contained in the bill are based on existing provisions and approaches of the BCCM Act. For example, the bill contains provisions to facilitate information and education services for unit owners and bodies corporate operating under BUGTA. The bill also aims to make dispute resolution services more accessible by providing simpler arrangements for making applications and clarifying how disputes are resolved. But most importantly, the amendments in the bill also mean that where a community body corporate has an arrangement to provide essential utilities, it must take all reasonable steps to ensure the continuity of those services, for example by undertaking necessary repairs and maintenance as quickly as possible. As a member of the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee, the member for Noosa raised several points in a statement of reservation that I would like to address. The member noted the growth of the community title sector and advocated for additional funding for the Office of the Commissioner of Body Corporate and Community Management. I appreciate and agree with the member for Noosa's recognition of the continuing importance of information, education and dispute resolution services provided by the Commissioner's Office, given the huge growth that we have seen in the community title sector. And as mentioned earlier, the government has committed almost $3.5 million in additional funds for the Commissioner's Office to implement the reforms contained in this bill, along with the government's rental reforms as they relate to bodies corporate. The member for Noosa also pointed out that stakeholders have raised a range of issues that are not covered by the bill. And the member is correct that stakeholders have raised a wide range of issues and concerns, not only about BUGTA and the specified acts, but also the BCCM Act and its regulation models. The Community Titles Legislation Working Group established by government is considering a large number of these matters, including potential further reforms to harmonise BUGTA and the BCCM Act. However, the amendments in this bill have been prioritised to address the most serious deficiencies in the BUGTA and MUD Act. They are complex pieces of legislation and we have prioritised the most pressing concerns, but our Community Titles Working Group continue to look at all of the issues faced by the community titles schemes in Queensland, and further legislation will be progressed. Finally, the member for Noosa was concerned that the bill did not include provisions to allow bodies corporate to recoup costs when undertaking debt recovery proceedings. Debt recovery under the BCCM Act, including issues raised by stakeholders about recovery costs, is also one of the topics being considered by the Community Titles Working Group. It is important to note that this analysis and consideration is to be completed before any new cost recovery provision in BUGTA or other acts based on the existing BCCM Act provisions. In summary, this bill contains important targeted amendments to improve the operation of BUGTA and the MUD Act. These amendments will facilitate better services for unit owners and make body corporate governance fairer and more transparent, and I commend the bill to the House.
I call the member for Clayfield.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I too welcome those residents and investors and owners at Coran Cove who are here today. So, in particular, a frequent correspondent of mine, Mr Daniel Purser, who managed to find my email and sends them to me at all hours of the day and night, and I'm equally happy to respond to him at all hours of the day and night as well, including last night. So to Daniel, to David Bowden, who both came to see me to make sure I was fully across all the issues in relation to this legislation, and to all, as they described, all the other Coorang Cove warriors, welcome. And I hope that within 3 hours of debate on this particular bill, you walk away from Parliament thinking that at least someone has listened to you and that the Parliament of Queensland will do something for you. So welcome along, and I hope you enjoy the rest of my speech. Because in doing so you will join my many colleagues in this place who do so as well. Mr Deputy Speaker, the LNP will be supporting this bill, of course, and we might as we consider the bill, we might reflect on the words of Sir Peter Delamoth, the Liberal member for Bowen, and that's saying something, and Minister for Justice and Attorney-General, who in 1964, when introducing the very first Building Units Titles Bill, said, and I quote, "It is not within human power to make neighbours live together in harmony." And I think that is as true today as it was 58 years ago, and because of that we find ourselves delving into the arcane depths of body corporate law. But it's important we recognise the importance of effective community title legislation for the many hundreds of thousands of owners of lots in community title schemes, as well as the owners of lots in complex schemes covered by various pieces of special purpose legislation. In 2017, in its options paper, the Commercial Property Law Research Centre, QUT, said, "Bodies corporate are often referred to as the fourth tier of government. Like a government, bodies corporate provide services and create laws in the form of bylaws. Unlike a government, however, bodies corporate are made up of private individuals who voluntarily enter into agreement with other private individuals to share the costs of owning and maintaining private property. The mixture of individual ownership of lots and collective ownership of common property creates unique challenges for balancing individual and collective rights. If some individuals fail to follow the rules or pay their share of expenses, this can have dramatic consequences for the other individuals in the community." And I'm sure that there are many members in this place who have no doubt had representations from constituents who live in community title schemes dealing with the conflicts that inevitably arise and the obligations and the consequences when people don't do what they are obliged to do. So this bill is important as it addresses long-standing shortfalls in the way in which bodies corporate and mixed-use developments that rely on provisions in the Building Units and Group Titles Act, the BUGTA Act, are managed. And the recent history of community title legislation helps explain why this bill, and hopefully the others that the Attorney has mentioned to follow, are needed. Some considerable detail is provided in the explanatory notes, and for those who want to really go into the depths of it, I recommend those. Perhaps I can save people the agony of reading those, and they just have to have the agony of listening to me. I say recent history because it is a history that I clearly remember. When I first started having an involvement with bodies corporate as a very, very young and enthusiastic article clerk, the BUGTA Act itself was only 3 years old. When the BCCM Act came into being in 1997, a large part of the legal work I was involved with was strata titling, and I was involved in one of the earliest CBD strata title offices, the development at 344 Queen Street, which is also where the first Merlot coffee shop was located. As similar types of development and more complex plans emerged, the limitations of the BUGTA Act became more obvious. And as acceptance of the provisions of the 1994 Land Title Act grew, including the establishment of an electronic register and the virtual abolition of paper titles, the reality of the need for new communities titles legislation grew. As the explanatory notes helpfully point out, most of those early developments were simple subdivisions of land or buildings with a single body corporate. So they were quite straightforward. You either had lots that were divided along a line and they were group titles lots, or you had units created by the walls and ceilings and floors going up in a building, and they were building unit lots. Complex developments, however, could only be created complex developments could be created, but they relied on special planning acts to provide for the establishment and governance of an overarching hierarchical structure for development subdivisions and associated bodies corporate, and that combined with the BUGTA Act to provide for the establishment and governance of individual subsidiary layer subdivisions and their associated bodies corporate. So the Special Act created the overarching planning regime, and then it incorporated the Bugta Act, which dealt with the management issues for each of the subsidiary, if you like, schemes in those larger, more complex developments. So in effect, the Special Act set out the planning and high-level structural matters, and the Bugta covered governance matters and had to work hand in hand. They had to work in conjunction. One of those Special Acts is what we're dealing with here today, which is the Mixed Use Development Act, which was originally passed in 1993. So after the BCCM Act commenced in 1997, which was the replacement, if you like, for Bugta, most developments under the old Bugta transitioned to it. And for a variety of reasons, complex schemes did not, and they remained under the old structure. And there were good reasons for that at the time. There was a fear that in transitioning some of those matters would not be covered by the new legislation. There was a good and proper understanding for those in those complex schemes, particularly the developers of those complex schemes, about what they were going to be entitled to do in further stages of development. But since then, as the BCCM Act and its regulations have been amended and updated, there has only been a limited reform to Bugta and the Mud Act. So, having been set in stone, if you like, back in 1993 and back in 1980, it was sort of left alone, and there was no real attention paid to advancing the cause of complexes under both of those acts. And this means that while those Bugta Act developments that transitioned to the BCCM Act have benefited from enhancements to that Act since its commencement, schemes in complex developments that remain regulated under a mix of Bugta and MUD have not. Time has taken its toll on those complex scheme developments, and it has been apparent for many years that the provisions in Bugta required significant changes to bring it into line with modern community title living needs and expectations. And this is in fact recognised on page 2 of the explanatory notes to this bill under the heading "Deficiencies of the Bugta Act and MUD Act are increasingly apparent." The former LNP government recognised this problem almost a decade ago, and as a result, in August 2013, commissioned the QUT Commercial and Property Law Research Centre to conduct an independent review of Queensland's property laws. And the review explored a range of issues involving community title schemes, and after extensive and lengthy consultation and options papers issued over 3 years, it resulted in 3 reports being delivered to this government in 2017 and 2018. Now, the first report dealt with body corporate governance issues, including bylaws and debt recovery, and it was released in 2017. The second report dealt with procedural issues, including voting procedures and meeting procedures for bodies corporate, and it was released in 2017. And the third and final report provided recommendations into consistency between the Body Corporate and Community Management Act, that is the current Act, and Bugta, and it was delivered to government in 2018. And that final report contains 7 recommendations. And Mr Deputy Speaker, the question is, why has it taken so long? Why has it taken 4 years for this Labor government to act? And that is also the question that I think many long-suffering residents and owners in mixed-use development schemes have been asking, and it is a question that is unanswered. Now, while this bill is not directed to any one community title scheme, the example of Coran Cove sets out the problems that this delay has caused most starkly. Now, Mr Purser, you will be referred to a number of times in my speeches, but you are a victim of your own activity by turning up and speaking at the committee hearings, because Mr Purser, an owner at Coran Cove, gave evidence to the committee and is a very strong supporter of the changes in this legislation. I believe that he finds it difficult to believe that these changes have taken so long to be brought on. In fact, he was so frustrated that in the last sitting week of this parliament, he resent a letter outlining the issues at Coran Cove he originally sent to the member for Redcliffe as Attorney-General on the 4th of June 2019. And this was his plea to the Leader of the House back then. Please push the Bugta bill to the top of the list for final debate. This has been dragging on way too long. It was already a problem in 2019 when I wrote to you then, and it certainly hasn't got any better. Well, what is the problem? Here's an outline of the problem, as one owner of a unit at Coran Cove told me. One company owes our body corporate over $14 million. That debt has been accumulating over many, many years. That is $14 million of budgeted expenses, including daily repairs and maintenance and long-term sinking fund projects on buildings, water systems, sewer treatment facilities and generators, which is money that obviously isn't available to be spent. Due to a critical shortage of funds, the island is falling apart around our ears. Regular power outages, substandard water quality and sewer overflows have become the norm. At the same time as owing money, the same people behind the unfinancial entities are getting themselves and their friends and business associates onto the island body corporates and controlling the big decisions, even though they are hopelessly unfinancial due to unpaid levies. Some of these decisions include offering themselves discounts not available to other owners, preventing debt collection processes to be taken against themselves to collect unpaid levies, and also blocking the appointment of legal practitioners to defend the regular onslaught of legal actions brought about by the same parties. Mr Deputy Speaker, a foul witch's cauldron of problems, all brought about because the legislation was not properly updated when it ought to have been. People owing large amounts of money, restricting others from being able to get onto bodies corporate, but using their positions themselves to be able to block those very same bodies corporate from recovering the debts that they owe. The owner goes on to say, the new Act changes will hopefully make these conflicted people ineligible to hold body corporate positions and put the power back in the hands of mums and dads who have to pay their levies. And in evidence to the committee, Mr Purser said, and I quote, "It has been a long time coming since the 2018 property law review regarding the inconsistency between BUGTA and BCCM was released. A long time indeed for the many ordinary mum and dad owners and investors who have paid their way. Other evidence to the committee reinforces the difficulties unit owners at Coran Cove have faced over that time, and indeed submitters were thankful to the Attorney-General and the working group for bringing this bill forward and for finally acting. And I acknowledge that there is a great degree of relief amongst those unit owners, and I am sure others in similar circumstances, and there's about a dozen other complex schemes covered by this type of legislation. So the bill is certainly welcome, but equally it is abundantly clear the problems the bill hopefully addresses have been ongoing for, again I quote, the Green, many, many years. And it's been an ongoing concern for the LNP, and is why I questioned the Attorney-General in estimates in 2020 about progress on the implementation of reforms to property law and body corporate legislation. And at that stage, that's now nearly 2 years ago, we were advised that a new community titles working group, headed up by the Deputy Director-General for Liquor, Gaming and Fair Trading, would be leading the process of bringing about change. But unfortunately, while all this has been going on, the residents of those mixed-use development schemes have continued to pay the price. As any review of the media shows, residents at Coran Cove have certainly borne the brunt of those delays. In June 2020, a service provider, so this is someone who provides electricity to the island, associated with the resort manager, that is the person who manages the resort, brought a $15 million claim against the body corporate. This is despite the fact that associated entities of that very same service provider, the person suing for $15 million, owed the body corporate millions in unpaid levies. It effectively denied the body corporate the capacity to pay the service provider, and the service provider then chose to sue the body corporate. The situation was so farcical that the utility supplier to the island cut off gas supplies because maintenance had slipped so badly the gas lines had become unsafe, and the result was residents had no gas for hot water or for cooking, and the residents were advised to go out and buy butane camping cookers. Now, amid a plethora of claims and counterclaims, residents also couldn't rely on the body corporate manager and were told to get their own legal advice at the cost of thousands of dollars. Again, obligations that a properly run body corporate should have accepted and taken on themselves. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, regrettably, the situation has deteriorated. Originally I had in the last 5 weeks since this bill was set to come on for debate, and 2 weeks ago I changed it to 7 weeks, and now it's 9 weeks. In fact, only 6 weeks ago, on Wednesday the 28th of September, electricity was cut off to many of the eco-cabins lived in by residents. Distressing scenes of elderly residents sitting on top of electrical boxes to stop contractors disconnecting the power were reported in the Gold Coast Bulletin, and I table a copy of that report. Only 5 weeks ago now, there were reports of water being cut to residents' homes without warning, and I table a copy of that report from the Gold Coast Bulletin as well. Now, it's not the purpose of this legislation to determine the rights and wrongs of any one development or dispute, and the dispute at Coorang Cove is complex, difficult to follow and, quite frankly, a lawyer's picnic. But it is the purpose of this place to pass fair, proper and modern laws that enable such disputes to be resolved and, to the greatest extent, resolved quickly and economically. Realistically, ordinary residents cannot afford the costs of lengthy disputes, and nor should they be expected to bear the costs of such a large burden simply to live in their own homes in a community title scheme. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do say, despite this legislation being welcome, it is to this government's shame that it has taken so long to get this bill brought forward. And I note there is still more to come that has been delayed for far too long as well. Now, I also note Clause 2 of the bill provides that Parts 2, 4 and 5 and Schedule 1 commence on a day to be fixed by proclamation. These are the operative parts. These are the parts of the legislation that the residents who are in the gallery today and others in body corporates need to have in place in order to be able to resolve their circumstances. So I ask the Attorney, in her response to the debate, to shed some light on when she expects royal assent to be given by the Governor to this legislation, because this bill needs to be brought on before the Executive Council for royal consent as a matter of urgency after it passes this place. Many people are waiting anxiously for these parts of the bill to come into effect, and as we have seen, even a delay of 9 weeks since the bill was first expected to be debated has led to further grief and trouble in some of these developments. Also asked whether the Attorney can confirm that all necessary procedures and forms and practices are in place to facilitate these changes. It's important that the process and the system is in place so that we don't just have a piece of legislation that says this is what is to happen, but that the forms and processes and staff are in place so that when an applicant turns up on day one, there is an answer, and they're not told to come back in 10 days' time when we've got the form ready, or we don't have someone trained to deal with this matter. It needs to be in place and ready to go once the bill has received assent and comes into effect. I also want to urge on the Attorney that sufficient funds be made available to ensure the Body Corporate Commissioner can deal with complaints and disputes when they inevitably arise following the proclamation of the new laws. I note, and I had already noted, that there is $2.5 million, but it's important to note that is over 3 years has been allocated to the Office of the Body Corporate Commissioner. Will that $2.5 million, just over $700,000 a year, be sufficient to address the issues and to make sure that there are sufficient resources in place to deal with the matters that are contemplated by this legislation? Is it a sufficient amount? And again, here's what someone at a scheme said to me. We know that the conflicted people have already started transferring properties to third parties in anticipation of the new bill. So those people who have been doing the wrong thing have already started taking action because they know this bill's coming through. And we know there will be more fights coming up and cutting through red tape when they start crying and filing to the body corporate referee. Please, something you could agitate possibly is to lean on the AG and demand that they have dedicated resources available to deal with the conflicted people as a result of the changes. We'd really hate to see these new applications put on the end of the queue, as we are already seeing blowout of over 6 months in current referee applications. So, to the Attorney-General, on behalf of those people, can I say please make sure there is adequate funds and resources made available so that disputes are not left languishing at the end of a long line. Laws with no real prospect of speedy application or power of enforcement and resolution would be a cruel hoax on owners who have waited so long for help. And in this respect, I note the comments in the explanatory notes about the cost of implementation, including the provision of information and education services and a period of implementation and adjustment by referees. So I know that's going to happen. What we want to make sure is that it happens in the fastest time possible, and it may well be the case, and perhaps the Attorney can answer this, that steps have already been taken, that training is already underway, and that referees are aware of the changes brought about by this bill. Because the Green or the explanatory notes also note that it's expected there will be a modest but not insignificant rise in dispute resolution applications. So there'll be an increase, and there needs to be resources to deal with that. There's much in this bill that will hopefully go a long way to resolving disputes more promptly and fairly. And the provisions of the bill that address a number of the most common complaints about the existing situations are peppered throughout it. There are obligations on bodies corporate to act reasonably. New definitions are inserted in both BUGTA and the MUD Act provisions covering a plethora of defined terms, such as associates, electable persons, a service provider and relevant body corporate debt, amongst any others. And these are new terms that will need to be worked out and decided by referees in the matters of dispute. Importantly, new section 32A, inserted by clause 8 of the bill, provides that any levy contribution that isn't paid within 30 days, the body corporate may recover as a debt. So a body corporate can take action after 30 days to recover a debt. But subsection 2, more importantly, says the body corporate must start proceedings to recover any contribution levy that has been outstanding for 2 years and 30 days. So they must start taking action after 2 years and 30 days. And this is an important change that goes some way to ensuring bodies corporate are maintained on a sound financial footing and that defaulting owners don't get a free ride from those owners who are doing the right thing. And again, this is exactly the situation that has been occurring at Coorong Cove. Another clause I want to highlight is clause 35 of the bill, which amends section 172 by inserting provisions that protect small lot owners from the capricious actions of a substantial undeveloped lot owner who fails to pay levies and therefore renders a subsidiary body corporate unfinancial and hence unable to participate in body corporate meetings of the scheme. And again, this is of course what's happening at Coorong Cove. Section 170, clause 35 amends section 172 by providing provisions to protect those small lot owners in certain circumstances. I also, in the contribution, want to briefly acknowledge the changes to the Fair Trading Act to give the Office of Fair Trading infringement notice powers consistent with powers already able to be exercised by the Commonwealth in relation to the use of gift cards issued in Queensland. And those changes are uncontroversial and bring Queensland law into line with the rest of the country. Mr Speaker, while this bill may not be the final word, and there are hopefully further steps in reforming the community title sector to come, we don't want to let the pursuit of the perfect be the enemy of the good. And while not perfect, as many submitters have said, and I acknowledge the very many submitters, including the organisations and solicitors and others involved in the administration of bodies corporate, this bill will go a long way to fixing some of the immediate and most pressing problems that are being experienced by owners, as well as some of the longer-term issues that have been festering for far too long. As I said at the beginning, I want to thank everyone who made contributions, to those who contacted me, to those who have carried on the fight for a long time against sometimes seemingly impossible odds to provide safe homes, accommodation and the provision of basic services to people. Congratulations. Hopefully today part of that battle will have been resolved in your favour and that you will see a far better outcome and experience a far better outcome than you have to date. We will be supporting the bill.
Mr Speaker.
Call the member for Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. The Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill was introduced into the Legislative Assembly and referred to the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee on the 21st of June 2022. The policy objectives of the bill are to improve the operation of the Building Units and Group Titles Act 1980 and the Mixed Use Development Act 1993, with a focus on making body corporate governance arrangements fairer for proprietors and provide for effective and consistent enforcement options for gift card requirements under the Australian consumer law in Queensland. The committee, in its report number 30, which was tabled in the Assembly on the 12th of August 2022, has recommended to the Assembly that this bill be passed. Stakeholders and subscribers were invited by the committee to make written submissions on the bill, with 15 submissions being received by the committee, and I'd like to thank those subscribers and the people who appeared at the committee to give their evidence. The submissions received by the committee for this inquiry traversed a broad spectrum of body corporate related issues. Some were outside the scope of the bill. There has been successive Queensland Acts providing for community title-style developments since the mid-1960s. These acts have allowed for land or buildings to be subdivided into individually owned freehold lots and common property. The arrangements covering the community title-style developments were established to provide a governance body for these developments. Over time, the governance of these developments became complex. The Body Corporate and Community Management Act allowed for establishment of complex, multi-layered community title schemes, including developments, intended to be progressively subdivided over a series of stages. Prior to the commencement of the Body Corporate and Community Management Act, several complex, multi-layered community title scheme developments were established using a combination of specialised planning laws in conjunction with the Building Units and Group Titles Act. These specialised planning laws, also known as the specific acts, included the Mixed Use Development Act 1993 and the Integrated Resort Development Act 1987 and the Sanctuary Cove Resort Act 1985. In these complex and multi-layered developments, the overarching body corporate may have been responsible for the provision of essential utility services, including, for example, sewage services, electricity, gas and water. The predecessor to the Body Corporate and Community Management Act was the BUGTA, which did not cater for these types of complex developments. Basic community title schemes established under BUGTA transitioned to the new built Body Corporate and Community Management Act. However, because of the substantial level of complexity and risk, multi-layered developments did not transition to the Body Corporate and Community Management Act and continued to be governed by both relevant specific acts used to establish the scheme and the Building Units and Group Title Act. Historically, the proprietors of the multi-layered schemes under the Mixed Use Development Act and other specific acts have generally not benefited from those original or subsequent Body Corporate Community Management Act improvements, and evidence provided to the committee and the department during the public consultation for the exposure draft of the legislation highlighted concerns around a lack of requirements to ensure acceptable levels of probity in governance processes and a lack of protection for proprietors. Identified deficiencies in the current legislation revealed issues such as conflicts of interest that influence the body corporate decision-making, frequent and costly disputes in court proceedings, corporate interests owing large debts to subsidiary that is a lower-level body corporate, thus preventing, under debt or voting prohibitions, the subsidiary from participating in governance decisions made by the overarching parent, that is a higher level body corporate, disruptions to privately provided utility services, problems accessing government services and existence for the Building Units and Group Titles Act, or the Mixed-Use Development Act issues. At the public hearing held on the committee, heard from witnesses, some of who gave their evidence as individuals who had experienced issues when trying to resolve outcomes that arose from one or more of these identified deficiencies. Mr. Daniel Purser, one of the individuals who appeared as a witness at the hearing, stated, "I'm a long-term owner and also a committee member of a body corporate in an extreme trouble building units and development. Here today I represent hundreds of owners of our community and I warmly welcome the amendments put forward in the bill. I'm no lawyer, but in the way that I read the changes, I believe that the benefits are numerous. I also strongly agree with the tone of some of the other submissions you have read that suggested that the Body Corporate and Community Management Act is also not perfect and that there are some shortfalls in these Building Units and Group Titles Act changes. However, these changes are a huge step in the right direction and will make a difference for all owners in our building group, where a lot of owners and residents are elderly, disabled or just straight out vulnerable. These changes will give us a voice. It has been held. I'd like to thank the Attorney-General and her team for taking the initiative of introducing these changes. It has been a long time coming since the 2018 Property Law Review regarding the inconsistencies between the BUCTA and the BCCM was released. Targeted stakeholder consultation was also undertaken by the Department of Justice. The Community Titles Legislative Working Group, which includes key stakeholders such as the Strata Community Association of Queensland, Queensland Law Society and the Australian College of Strata Lawyers. While there are some initial concerns about the potential for some measures in the draft legislation to have unintended consequences, these were addressed through a refinement of the proposals in the bill during the consultative period. There were key aspects that were identified as essential to achieving the objectives of the bill, which were supporting information, education services, enhancing dispute resolution, obligations of body corporates, committee eligibility, subsidiary body corporate representation and voting, committee decision-making, financial management and information disclosure. The proposed bill includes amendments for improving body corporate committee governance, including a requirement to act reasonably, provisions to prevent conflicts of interest by tidying up the committee membership and committee voting eligibility, and provisions to ensure important information about body corporate governance activities is given to proprietors. The proposal under the bill, whereby a person may not be elected as a voting member of the committee or executive committee if the person is an associate of the person, owes a debt to the body corporate or the associated body corporate, is a body corporate manager for the body corporate or an associate body corporate, was welcomed by stakeholders, communicated with the committee during the inquiry. The process will provide the opportunity for people most affected, that is, the unit holders themselves, by the actions or inactions of the body corporate, to have a voice in their body corporate. The amendments support the financial viability of body corporates by placing restrictions around the use of inappropriate off-staff arrangements to satisfy levy contributions in place of monetary payments, and by putting in place appropriate debt recovery timeframes. The amendments will also prevent proprietors and subsidiary schemes, especially residential lot owners, from being excluded from participation in the community body corporate governance solely due to debts owed by their subsidiary. I commend the bill to the House.
Deputy Speaker.
Call the member for Scenic Rim.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The member for Clayfield has covered a great deal of the substance of matters in relation to this bill, but there are some other matters that I'd like to point to. But before I do that, can I acknowledge people in the gallery watching this debate today who have been very much affected by the issues that are being resolved by this bill. Thank you to all of the submitters to this inquiry, including those who attended the committee's hearings to give evidence to the committee. And I think it's not saying too much, Mr Deputy Speaker, to remark that the content of this bill is a little dry at times, but it shows how important it is to those people who are here in the gallery and how much it's impacted on their lives that they have attended Parliament not once but twice now in order to see the passage of this bill. Such has been the impact of the problems that are being fixed by this bill. In the committee process, I think the committee showed the value of that process. We traversed a lot of ground, some of which was relevant to this particular bill, but we also touched on a lot of other things that should be the subject of future reform, and I urge the Attorney-General to bring forward those further reforms, especially to the BCCM Act, but other acts as well, as soon as possible, because there was a wide range of issues identified throughout that committee process that weren't in this bill, but were very important nonetheless to those submitters, and spoke to a large number of problems that need fixing in the BCCM and other acts. Mr Bowden, who appeared before us at committee, I just want to mention something that he said to us in committee, and he said, "I've got to admit I'm a little surprised by you guys. You are really good. I was not sure what to expect here today." And can I thank Mr Bowden for his compliments to the committee and especially to the work carried out by the member for Currumbin and the member for Noosa, and also the government members of the committee as well, in exploring all of those issues. And I think we all learnt a great deal throughout that process. And the Attorney-General could look at our report, which sets out a very long list of other issues raised in terms of a way forward for future reform. But thank you, Mr Bowden, for that compliment, and you were a very good witness as well. Mr Deputy Speaker, the bill deals with a lot of legacy issues from legislation that's been in place for a long time, and as is the normal course, there were many complex issues raised by stakeholders. And I would like to associate myself, as I said, with a lot of the comments from the member for Clayfield. This bill deals only with a small number of these issues, predominantly around body corporate governance arrangements, transparency and dispute resolution, particularly with complex developments at Curran Cove, Sanctuary Cove and Hope Island. They are complex arrangements, and as I've said, this legislation addresses some of them, but there are others that need to come in the future, including provisions to deal with the recovery of costs for body corporates when they need to take action to recover debts. And this was a recurring theme throughout the inquiry, the issues faced by body corporates where people don't pay their levies that are due, people don't pay contributions that are due, and that body corporate is forced to take legal action or other action of an adversarial nature to recover that money, but there is presently no provisions to allow those costs to be recovered. And that's a problem, because it provides a real there's no disincentive for people not to pay their dues and then have legal action taken against them, like there is in the ordinary course of litigation in business. It's worth noting that whilst most stakeholders were broadly in favour of all the amendments, there was a lack of consensus about what could be done to strengthen the laws and how those amendments would function. I just want to touch on a couple of those issues in relation to this bill, and there was some conjecture about some of them. The bill preserves the voting rights of unfinancial subsidiaries to participate in decision-making of community and precinct body corporates where a subsidiary is unfinancial because the owners of undeveloped land in the subsidiary have failed to pay their contributions. This is a real issue for those people who lose all their representation due to the actions of a recalcitrant landholder in a multi-layer body corporate. And pleasing that the bill will address that issue. It also allows, in relation to, similar to the BCCMA, allows referees in a dispute to order a moderate cost of up to $2,000 where a dispute resolution application is found to be frivolous, vexatious, misconceived or without substance. So there's some disincentive, but that's a very moderate disincentive to making those type of claims. I also would touch on the fact that there was some opinion in the committee process that the requirement for body corporate committees to act, quote, reasonably, unquote, is too open to interpretation. And I can certainly, I think many members would be able to relate to that. The concept of what is reasonable is very, very wide, can be interpreted very, very widely. Of course, many members in this House would be able to relate to that in our own practice of dealing with each other across the chamber. And what is reasonable to one person is not reasonable to another, and so it is in the relationships of business. As the member for Clayfield pointed out, when this one of the bills was introduced 58 years ago, it was noted that you can't legislate that people will be able to get on with each other, and so there's always going to be these type of disagreements. And that concept of being required to act reasonably can be very open to misinterpretation. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've also already mentioned the issue of there being cost orders for dispute resolution applications, and there's a whole shopping list of things that need to be brought forward very quickly by the Attorney-General. And when we see that in Queensland there is a very large number of people living in body corporate scenarios, apartments and complexes where this legislation applies, there should be no more delays of the type we saw bringing this bill forward. 4 years is a long time after a review process has been completed for legislation to be formulated, and even then legislation that doesn't deal with all of the issues that would have been raised throughout all those reviews. The fact that it took some very direct action by residents affected, including those from developments like Coran Cove, to bring this bill about speaks volumes about the priorities of the government. They only deal with things when problems get to be very, very acute, when it's super urgent, if they're more organised and actually gave more priority to the things that need to be fixed for these communities, and in terms of regulation that affects so many people in Queensland who live in body corporate scenarios, then they would have headed off some of those problems before they became so acute. Although these are not new problems, they've been around for a very, very long time. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, we won't be opposing the bill. It goes a long way to fixing some of those very drastic problems. There's a whole big list of things that need to be fixed. In addition to that, the body corporate legislation, and the Attorney-General should bring forward another bill to deal with those issues so that the Legal Affairs Committee can review that and get all those submissions in and be able to bring another bill forward to fix all those issues. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Deputy Speaker.
The member for Caloundra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to contribute to the debate around the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. On July 22nd of this year, the committee held a public hearing and 6 separate individuals or entities gave evidence. This was in addition to 15 written submissions received on June 28th. Thanks as ever to the Secretariat staff who work so hard to bring these hearings and submissions to a smooth and organised process so that they can be properly considered. Thanks also to my fellow committee members. To the casual observer, the contents of this bill will not set the world on fire, but make no mistake, they are absolutely vital. The solitary recommendation of the committee is that the bill be passed. The objectives of the bill are very straightforward. There are identified deficiencies in the Bolton Act of 1980 and the Mixed Use Development Act, or MUDA, of 1993, which this bill seeks to fix. The committee was advised by the department that, while the amendments contained in the bill are generic and not intended to be a direct intervention in disputes arising at Curran Cove, consideration has been given to representations of Curran Cove proprietors about what they perceive as the deficiencies in the MUDA Act and BUGTA. They adversely impact on fair and transparent body corporate governance in relevant developments and which result in detriment to proprietors. To touch on a few of the proposed amendments, the changes will capture such things as proposed amendments that in many cases are modelled on existing BCCM provisions to address the identified deficiencies of BUGTA and MUDA to increase transparency and fairness of body corp governance for proprietors, that is to say unit owners, in relevant developments. The changes facilitate body corporate access to dispute resolution services by relaxing the current requirements. The bill relaxes the special resolution requirements in relation to applications for a referee's order under BUGTA's dispute resolution provisions. This change will make it easier, for example, for a subsidiary body corporate to seek referee's orders to resolve a dispute it is having with a community body corporate. The bill provides greater flexibility for dispute referees. The bill expressly requires community and precinct body corporates and executive committees under MUDA and subsidiary body corporates and committees under BUGTA to act reasonably when executing their functions, including making or not making a decision similar to the BCCM legislation. This approach is largely based on the BCCM legislation, with some exceptions. Crucially, the bill strengthens provisions governing debtors and the composition of committees under BUGTA and executive committees under MUDA service contractors, letting agents, body corporate managers and persons owing debt, along with prescribed associates of that person. They will not be eligible for election to the committee in recognition of the potential for related conflict of interest to impact on the performance of their duties. Deputy Speaker, while it's all good and correct to hear from the department, and while it's entirely appropriate for those of us on the committee to wax lyrical about these changes, I think in this instance it would be very useful and very instructive to hear from those members of the public most affected. In this instance, Mr Daniel Purser. In the public hearing of July 22nd, Mr Purser made this contribution as part of his submission to the public hearing. Good morning, distinguished members of the committee. I am a long-term owner and also a committee member of a body corporate in an extremely troubled BUGTA MUD development. Here today I represent hundreds of owners of our community. I warmly welcome the amendments put forward in this bill to BUGTA. I'm no lawyer, but in the way I read these changes, I believe that the benefits are numerous. These changes are a huge step in the right direction and will make a real difference for all owners in our building group, where a lot of owners and residents are elderly, disabled or just straight out vulnerable. These changes will give us all a choice. It has been hell. I would like to thank the Attorney-General and her team for taking the initiative of introducing these changes. Or indeed the words of Mr David Bowen of the Eco Body Corporate Committee, Curran Cove Resort. We are all very encouraged by the detail contained within the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill, as it addresses many of the key problems that have crippled Curran Cove over the past several years. Deputy Speaker, with such sincere and heartfelt endorsement from submitters who have a lived experience of BUGTA and the MUD Act, I enthusiastically commend the bill to the House.
Speaker.
Call the member for Newsom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The main legislation for body corporates in Queensland is the Body Corporate and Community Management Act 1997, used for governance of subdivisions such as apartment buildings. However, even now, as we've heard, some developments remain under the older legislation. The Building Units and Group Titles Bill aims to improve the operation of the older Building Units and Group Titles Act, or BUGTA, and the Mixed Use Development Act 1993, which is the MUDA, with a focus on making body corporate government arrangements much fairer. It does this through supporting information and education services, enhancing dispute resolution, and we heard a lot of those at our hearings, providing clearer obligations of body corporates, improved rules for committee membership and decision-making, amongst others, and which were all very welcomed. However, as outlined in my statement of reservation in the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee report, there are three main concerns in relation to the bill, and even though the Attorney-General has mentioned these with reassurances, I will briefly recount them. Firstly, the funding relating to this bill was provided in the 2022-2023 budget, where the government committed an additional $2.5 million over 3 years for the Office of the Commissioner for Body Corporate and Community Management to implement the reforms in this bill. However, no additional ongoing funding was provided for the Office of the Commissioner, which has been under extreme duress due to the increases in Queenslanders living within body corporates, leading to delays in resolutions. A funding increase for the Office of the Commissioner is warranted and needed. Secondly was the limited scope of the bill, which only addresses a fairly narrow, though very important and prioritised set of issues in the old acts. In saying that, the issues it does address have been welcomed, and we heard earlier from the gallery, body corporate members of Coron Cove Island Resort and others, which are administered under the old acts and who have had many difficulties over some years, and no doubt there will be celebrations on these amendments. However, the submissions, including from my electorate during the committee's inquiry, highlighted a broad range of other issues in the body corporate area that are of major concern and must be addressed. These included the long-term contracts for body corporate managers, procedural issues such as timing for circulation of minutes and notification of committee meetings, as well as who is eligible to be elected to the committee or be a non-voting member. The Attorney has mentioned that the government has established a community titles legislation working group, CTLWG, to provide advice on key community titles related issues and to promptly address the issues that this bill has failed not to do. Lastly, the bill introduces a new requirement for body corporates in the old acts for mandatory recovery of body corporate levy debts. The Strata Community Association Queensland raised a significant problem with this provision, in that without the ability to recover costs, the body corporate is obliged to incur significant costs, which may place the body corporate in a worse financial situation. And again, it is appreciated that the Attorney mentioned the CTW group and that they will be investigating this. It's also been reassuring that this will not be applicable until this part of the bill is resolved. As has been raised previously, the practical functioning of the committee system and processes, as well timelines as mentioned, is another example of the need to review these as part of greater efficiencies and outcomes for Queenslanders. I thank our Chair, the member for Toohey, fellow committee members, our extremely hard-working Secretariat and all submitters, as well witnesses to the hearing, and they really did. They shared their stories, which was really sad to hear many of them because of what's been happening. However, it has been good to hear how this bill will assist. Hopefully, the other changes that are needed will be on the way shortly, and all can finally see some light at the end of what has been a very long, dark tunnel. Thank you, and I commend the bill to the House.
Deputy Speaker.
Call the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise also to make a contribution to the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill. This bill will does contain amendments to improve the operation of the Building Units and Group Titles Act and the Mixed Use Development Act, which others have said are shortened to BUGTA and the MUD Act. The focus of these amendments are on making body corporate governance arrangements more transparent and fairer for proprietors, for example, unit owners in relevant developments. Deputy Speaker, currently there are over 500,000 body corporate lots in more than 50,000 community title schemes across Queensland. And for anyone who has been on a body corporate or been managed by a body corporate, I think it's fair to say that where we can establish a clear legislative framework, particularly around the expectations of body corporates, the role they play, the boundaries of that role, their expectations and transparency in how they communicate with their stakeholders, that clarity really will, in my view, help with preventing disputes for all parties. And we heard that in the inquiry, the need to make appropriate reforms to clarify their role. The Strata Community Association of Queensland, whose membership represents around 80% of the lots in Queensland, was largely supportive of the bill. Their view was that it strikes an appropriate balance in most areas between ensuring appropriate governance and protecting harmonious community living by ensuring that genuine conflicts of interest, frivolous and vexatious disputes and appropriate definitions of associates have been accounted for. This bill makes a vast improvement to those acts. There are several important drivers for the bill. Stakeholders are concerned that the BUGTA has not kept pace with modern Body Corporate Act, and as a result, proprietors and BUGTA developments do not enjoy the same protections as unit owners in the body corporate schemes. I think it's fair to say that the experience of proprietors at Coran Cove have illustrated why this reform is so important. For those unfamiliar with the Coran Cove case, it was really well documented in the media how proprietors were without access to basic services, water, electricity and gas for months. And although this bill is not designed to be a direct intervention in or response to those various disputes at Coran Cove, this dispute has helped in highlighting the deficiencies in the Mud Act and BUGTA, particularly when you compare it to Queensland's body corporate legislation. Many of the amendments contained in the bill are based on existing provisions of the Body Corporate Act and will go some way to offering similar protections to all proprietors. I want to talk briefly to a couple of the key reform areas that I understand will make a tangible difference to proprietors particularly. The first is in the area of dispute resolution. It'll make it easier for body corporate to access dispute resolution services. Currently, body corporates need a special resolution to initiate a proceeding. This bill relaxes that requirement under BUGTA. This change will make it easier, for example, for a subsidiary body corporate to seek referee orders to resolve a dispute it's having with a community body corporate. The bill also provides referees with greater flexibility by ensuring that they observe natural justice and act in a less formal and technical manner. Secondly, amendments will expressly require body corporates and committees under the BUGTA and MUD Act to act reasonably when carrying out their functions, including making or not making a decision. Critically, the bill includes requirements that where a higher-level body corporate enters into an agreement for the provision of amenities or services and it's an essential utility service which is prescribed as water, gas, electricity or sewage, it must take all reasonable steps to ensure continuity of that amenity or service. On the issue of conflicts of interest, potential conflicts of interest affecting committees are also addressed directly through new provisions requiring committee members to declare and refrain from voting on matters on which they have a conflict of interest. In relation to preserving subsidiary voting rights, the bill includes amendments that will preserve the rights of unfinancial subsidiaries to participate in decision-making of community and precinct body corporates where the subsidiary is unfinancial due to the failure of the owners of undeveloped land in the subsidiary to pay the required contributions. The bill requires notices of committee and executive committee meetings to be provided to committee members and proprietors prior to their meeting. It also requires minutes of the committee and executive committee meetings as well as general meetings to be provided to proprietors within 21 days of the holding of the meeting. Finally, in relation to discouraging vexatious applications, to minimise any potential increase in unmeritorious dispute resolution applications being made due to particular measures of the bill that expand grounds for dispute, it makes it easier to apply for dispute resolution or generally to increase awareness of the rights and responsibilities. The bill also allows referees to order moderate costs against an applicant who makes an application that is frivolous, vexatious, misconceived or without substance. Speaker, this bill is a great step towards resolving some of the issues under the various acts, and I commend it to the House.
Mr Acting Speaker.
Call the member for South Paradise.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise and speak to the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. I note that the members from Coran Cove, for whom some of these aspects of this bill are here today in the Parliament. I hope they're still here and they can see that the Parliament can work together, especially through the committee system, to bring legislation that is for the benefit of Queenslanders. I know it's been a significant issue for them, even though the bill itself is not particularly specifically addressed just for them. It's, as we've heard from other members, I want to thank the Attorney, the Shadow Attorney and other members for their contribution, and especially the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee for their report number 30 of the 57th Parliament dealing with this bill. As we've heard, the policy objectives are to improve the operation of the Building Units and Group Titles Act 1980, the BUGD Act, and the Mixed Use Development Act 1993, MUD Act, with a focus on making body corporate governance arrangements fairer for proprietors. I was interested to note from the explanatory notes about the fact that these were complex multi-owner developments that were done, and one of them, when it mentions the MUD Act and the Integrated Resort Development Act 1987, and I noticed in the explanatory notes that it also mentioned the Registration of Plans HSP Nominees Proprietary Limited Enabling Act 1980 and the Registration of Plans Stage 2 HSP Nominees Proprietary Limited Enabling Act 1984. And Mr Acting Speaker, you may be interested to know that that refers to the Paradise Centre, which is in my electorate of Surfers Paradise. And of course I've got more bodies corporate. I think Southport and Surfers Paradise, the two electorates, have more bodies corporate than nearly all the other electorates in the state combined, and that's been a significant issue. Well, it's obviously catching up. McConnell's now catching up, Mr Acting Speaker, and I've asked questions on notice about trying to get the breakdown of all the bodies corporate, because I've been saying for many years that I understand that that's the fact about Southport and Surfers Paradise having the numbers, and it's very difficult to actually get a complete breakdown of bodies corporates, partly because of the different definitions and the different legislation covering them. But there's no doubt that I do have lots of bodies corporate in my electorate, and it's interesting, the HSP nominees issue is interesting for me, Mr Acting Speaker, because Eddie Kornhauser, who was the founder of the Paradise Centre, was a patient of mine as a dentist. And the cheques that I would receive from him were always in the name HSP nominees. And I can say, Mr Acting Speaker, I miss those cheques. I miss those cheques. But I do want to acknowledge the contribution of the Paradise Centre, and in fact, it's been a significant issue recently that the new beachfront dining that's been designed there to bring back, after COVID, the issue of improving the amenity of Central Surfers Paradise through what the Paradise Centre has done has led to some re-energising of that precinct towards the beach, and that's something that Mayor Tom Tate and the Council have encouraged, and the Paradise Centre have made that contribution. And of course that would be happening under the legislation that covers their particular body corporate. But I also note that the second issue that this Act deals with, the Bill Acts, is to provide for effective and consistent enforcement options for gift card requirements under the Australian Consumer Law, ACL, in Queensland. Such things as are mentioned in the explanatory notes, the ACL gift card provisions prohibit post-purchase gifts on gift cards, post-purchase fees on gift cards, require a minimum 3-year expiry date for gift cards, and require the expiry date of the gift card to be prominently displayed. And I welcome those, Mr Acting Speaker, because I think many of us who receive gift cards, especially as we get older and your children have dilemmas as to what to give you, receive these gift cards, and especially if you use a portion of it in a purchase, you're never quite sure about the rules when you go to get the rest of the gift card as to whether it's still valid. And so I see that at page 10 of the explanatory notes it says the relevant clauses achieve the policy objectives by making consequential amendments to the infringement notice provisions in the Fair Trading Act to specify that the Commissioner for Fair Trading Commissioner can issue an infringement notice if the Commissioner has reasonable grounds to believe that a person has contravened a gift card provision in the Australian Consumer Law, that the bill ensures that penalties associated with the Fair Trading Act infringement notices align with the amounts prescribed for these offences in the Competition and Consumer Act 2010. So that's a more minor part of the bill. But turning to the most important part, which is what we've heard from other members, I'm regularly contacted, Mr Acting Speaker, by residents dealing with body corporate matters. And I'm first to acknowledge that most of those are under the BCCM Act. Many of these matters are usually straightforward and pertain to developments of land or buildings with a single body corporate. There are, however, a number of developments on the Gold Coast, such as we've heard from many others, Kooran Cove on South Stradbroke Island, Sanctuary Cove Hope Island and the Rhode Island complex in my electorate at Clear Island Waters, Mr Acting Speaker, where complex body corporate schemes are in place and issues around body corporate governance arrangements, transparency and dispute resolution are far more complex. And that, of course, goes along with the Paradise Centre that I've already mentioned. There are often complaints by proprietors that developers and operators of these complex schemes use the loopholes in legislation for their own financial advantage or to try to gain control of bodies corporate. I want to table articles that I think the member for Clayfield may have tabled as well, but one's entitled 89 Alone Powerless and Kooran Cove Nightmare from the Gold Coast Bulletin on the 24th of September 2022 by Melanie Whiting, highlighting how residents of Kooran Cove, who include the sick and elderly, have become collateral damage of a complex scheme consisting of 5 bodies corporate on the island. It's been reported that residents of at least 16 homes in Kooran Cove have been living without electricity for more than a week over claims of money owed by one of the bodies corporate within the complex body corporate structure. One of those residents was 89-year-old Jan Pitt, who's partially blind and has been unable to wash her clothes, take a shower or charge devices in her home. And I would say, Mr Acting Speaker, this is just disgraceful. The desperate situation unfolding in Kooran Cove highlights the urgent need for law reform. This bill will bring some immediate relief to the residents of Kooran Cove, but I note the concerns of the shadow attorney that lawyers, of course, will be looking forensically at this legislation to see if there's some way for clients potentially to get around some of the provisions. Unit owners find it difficult to fund complex and costly litigation against developers and operators and are clearly at a disadvantage. Issues unit owners face include non-payment of levies, exclusion of subsidiary bodies corporate, non-representation of owners, failure to deliver essential services, conflicts of interest and recovery of costs. So this legislation goes some way in addressing all of these issues. The government has indicated that there are further stages of amendments to come in tranche 3. I note the concerns that these were based on reports that came back to the government in 2017. However, no time frame has been provided to date for the future tranches. I note too in the committee report, page 2, under government consultation, as advised by the department, while the amendments contained in the bill are generic, and I'm quoting, and not intended to be a direct intervention in disputes arriving at Kooran Cove, consideration has been given to representations of Kooran Cove proprietors about what they perceive as the deficiencies in the Mud Act and BUGTA that adversely impact on fair and transparent body corporate governance in relevant developments and which result in detriment to proprietors. I note that most stakeholders are supportive of the bill and the LNP is not opposing it. The Strata Community Association is largely supportive of the bill, ensuring that genuine conflicts of interest, frivolous and vexatious disputes and appropriate definitions of associates have been accounted for. With the number of lots under strata schemes increasing, we need a government that's quick to act and that takes the lead on these issues rather than waiting until they get to crisis point. As I've said, I'll finish as I began, Mr Acting Speaker. In my electorate of Surfers Paradise, there's a growing number of residents living in apartments and complexes. The government continues to work through on a review begun by our government. It's led to minor changes, as we heard from the Attorney-General, but we are seeing things under the BCCM Act, which is referred to by the committee here, that we've got QCAT members who are making individual decisions on vexed issues such as smoking on balconies in unit complexes because of the lack of will to reform the BCCM Act. And I note what Peter Delamoth, that Attorney-General, said in 1964 in the Nicholls government. It's very hard to legislate for neighbours to have to get on with each other, but it's going to be an increasing issue as we have more and more people, and under the BCCM Act, which is also increasingly out of date, we need action on that as well.
Speaker.
Call the member for Algester.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022, and in doing so I want to acknowledge the great work of the Attorney-General and, of course, the committee who brought this forward. And I also want to acknowledge the residents and the representatives of Kooran Cove, some of whom join us today, for their great advocacy in this space. As we've heard before, Speaker, the overall objective of the bill is to improve the operation of the Building Units and Group Titles Act and the Mixed Use Development Act. The focus of the legislation is to make body corporate governance arrangements fairer and more transparent for proprietors such as unit owners. This bill also adds to the Palaszczuk Government's reform agenda for growing our community title sector and will deliver a suite of modern and more streamlined laws governing body corporates in Queensland. All Queenslanders who own units in community title schemes should enjoy the same rights and protections regardless of the legislative framework that property is governed by. The Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill bridges the gap between the protections and support that unit owners in community title schemes under body corporate legislation enjoy that those in older schemes managed under the Building Units and Group Titles Act and the Mixed Use Development Act do not. The amendments proposed in the bill will make governance arrangements in these older schemes fairer for unit owners. And, of course, fairness underscores everything we do on this side of the House. The reforms will also facilitate easier access to government information and support and provide more accessible and flexible processes to help unit owners resolve disputes. It will be clearer for unit owners or Queenslanders considering purchasing a unit in a community title scheme that what they can expect from the body corporate, including that body corporates will act reasonably, ensure continuity of essential utility services where it has undertaken to do so, and are obligated to take action to remain financially viable. Ensuring all unit owners can access government information and education to assist them understand and manage their investment in a community title scheme will help to make purchasing a unit in an older scheme more attractive and easier to manage. Encouraging and supporting investment in community title schemes will help Queenslanders to access safe, secure and affordable housing. The reforms proposed in the bill broaden and enhance protections for unit owners in older community title schemes that have fallen behind and not benefited from the incremental improvements delivered by the Body Corporate Act. This could help reduce the financial and emotional stress experienced by some unit owners in community title schemes by making body corporates more transparent and accountable for their activities and decisions, and providing more flexible, accessible dispute resolution processes to help unit owners and body corporates resolve issues. Speaker, the Palaszczuk Government is focused on delivering better protections for Queenslanders right across the housing continuum. Through the Queensland Housing and Homelessness Action Plan 2021 to 2025, we've also committed to key reforms with respect to retirement villages, manufactured homes and strengthening tenancy laws to provide greater certainty and security for Queenslanders. This important work builds on key protections delivered as a result of our Stage 1 rental reforms that commenced last month. The first stage of the Palaszczuk Government's rental law reform strengthened laws to ensure safety, security and certainty for Queensland renters by ending without grounds eviction and providing appropriate approved reasons to end a tenancy, making it easier for renters to have a pet, ensuring renters have confidence their rental property is safe, secure and functional by prescribing minimum housing standards, and ensuring people experiencing domestic and family violence have options to end a tenancy quickly and with limited end of lease costs. Speaker, of course, all of this came into effect in October 1st of this year, and of course we're using a staggered approach for other elements regarding all of those that I've just mentioned. And of course, the department is working closely with key stakeholders to ensure all parties understand their rights and responsibilities under Stage 1 reforms. Speaker, I mention all of this because it is about making sure that we are ensuring that we've got a fair processes in place right across the housing continuum. On top of that, we of course are ensuring that we're building more social and affordable homes. As has been mentioned in this House many times, we're investing a new record $3.9 billion in social and affordable housing in Queensland. And it will mean that since coming to office in 2015, the Palaszczuk Government, across a number of programs, will have commenced more than 13,000 social and affordable homes by 2027. We're very much focused on delivering the increased supply of social and affordable housing through that investment, partnering with the community housing sector, private industry and members of the community. Overall, these key housing reforms, including the Building Units and Group Titles and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2022, make it easier for Queenslanders across the housing spectrum, whether they be renters, landlords, investors, homeowners or retirees, and contribute to housing stability and security for all Queenslanders. Speaker, once again, I want to acknowledge all of the work of the committee and the Attorney-General for bringing forward this bill, and of course to acknowledge all of those residents and representatives of various locations across Queensland who will benefit from the changes in this bill. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
Member for Alcester, before you resume your seat, can you move that debate be adjourned, please?
Mr Speaker, I now move that the debate be adjourned.
The question is that debate be adjourned. Those of that opinion say aye. Those against no. I think the ayes have it. The House will now break for lunch. Resume at 2 p.m.